Hello and welcome to the FM interview. Words cannot describe how excited we are to welcome the Union Finance Minister of India, Nirmala Sitharaman, on the budget interview. Madam Minister, good evening. Thank you for joining us. I know it's a long day for you, so really appreciate that you could join us today. Madam Minister, before the budget, you had hinted that this will be once in a lifetime budget, and this indeed is a budget which was centered around health, hope and growth. This one deserves a standing ovation because industries welcomed it and stock markets were really on a tear today. You often said, Finance Minister, that crisis always gets the best out. So is this the best of Team Nirmala?
Well, I think it's the best of our Indian entrepreneurs. In spite of all the challenges which Corona threw at us, and once the lockdown was being slowly lifted, people went about getting back to normalcy, trying to get back to normalcy, and the way in which they've gone back to restoring their businesses and activities, it was a duty for the government to only facilitate. So I think the credit goes to the Indian entrepreneurs, small, nano, micro, traders, manufacturers, exporters, farmers. Literally everybody has gone back to what they are best at doing. And that is where the revival story began. And it is now continued for at least 3 full months. And the collection, GST collection tells you the story. It is only for us now to make sure that we spend the taxpayers' money responsibly, but in a big way, where the multiplier is. And that's where capital expenditure in building infrastructure has taken a priority.
Madam Minister, do you think this budget is an example to everyone in the world that growth can come back without increasing taxes and with asset monetization? Is that the spirit of the budget?
In a way it is, because we did not want to fund this stimulus. We did not want to fund this spending on infrastructure through increase in taxation. People need money in their hands, but money in people's hands can be through various different ways. If they get their job, if orders are being placed for their manufactured product, even if they are a small manufacturer, money reaches them. So we took a conscious call that we shall not tax them further and draw away money which is in their hands. To that extent, the government any possible income that would have arisen. I know there was a lot of speculation in the market about, a cess which will come in the name of the corona and so on. But we never thought of any of that. That was never on the table. Sure, people told us print currency. We have not even gone in that route. A responsible borrowing calendar is what we prepared ourselves for. And with that borrowing calendar, which is quite huge, we also made sure that a glide path is given for the fiscal deficit. Otherwise, prudential management wouldn't be the principle, and Prime Minister Modi is known as much for development, as much for his very prudential ways in which he manages the economy, the finances and so on. Gujarat, in his time, saw the kind of development and without compromising on the state's finances.
Madam Minister, the assumption of tax growth rate of 16.5%, do you think this is a conservative estimate? Because Indian economy is back, corporates are increasing capex, GST collections are hinting to a recovery. So will I be wrong if I say that in all likelihood your tax collections will beat your forecast and fiscal deficit could be much lower than what you indicated?
That will be good news, wouldn't it?
Are you being conservative because it's a COVID year?
Not really being conservative, but I'm being realistic.
Madam Minister, you've always said the budget has 2 parts. Part 1, which focuses on next 12 to 16 months, which is maths and allocations. And then there is a vision statement. Now, maths is something which you've presented. Let's move to the second part, which is vision statement. How do you think this budget will ensure that India moves from the trajectory of not survival to revival, but from survival to flourish?
Well, I think if you are able to give policy consistency, if you are able to prove that this government is not desperately wanting to generate revenue through taxation, but generate revenue through a better economy, because that will in any case bring in your indirect taxes and so on. And if you are announcing what you want to do, see, there is a consistency, which is what the industry wants. Industry wants certainty, industry wants a certain clarity in policy, and industry wants you to show that your intent is not always to make quick money through taxation, rates of taxation being raised, but by bringing a comprehensive facilitation from the government through consistency in policy and being predictable in a way. So that is the approach which I wanted to take, and that's where we are.
Madam Minister, the success of this budget also depends on the massive borrowing program, and for that interest rates have to remain low. Since the budget is growth oriented, it will have a multiplier impact. Do you fear that somewhere inflation could really reset all the assumptions?
Well, I don't think I'll keep a watch, of course, but I don't think I will worry about inflation. When there is definitely an increase in consumption, when there is greater demand, which is what we want, inflation is bound to be a bit going up, and there's also a lot of liquidity in the market. However, that is something which I'll worry than worry when there's no growth at all. And therefore, towards growth, I'll take smaller risks. I'll manage it as and when it happens. But my emphasis is give the push for growth.
Madam Minister, the other hallmark of this budget has been transparency. I looked at the budget document. Food subsidy is now part of the budget. There are no large provisionings which you've done. There is a 30,000 crore contingent liability which you provided for, that's for emergency. So do you think this is the most important highlight, and this is a big departure from the previous budgets which have been presented, the level of transparency?
I've been trying to step by step increase the level of transparency from July 2019 budget itself. The IGST dispute, which had prevailed quite a long time because a certain sum of money which was due to the states had already gone into the consolidated fund, had created a lot of worry. And from then I started going into the depths of what has happened, not just on the IGST, but also in the ways in which amounts are, camouflaged. So it has been a genuine attempt to make Government of India's statement, budgetary statements, a lot more trustworthy, a lot more honest. And I'm not saying the earlier attempts were to be dishonest, but it is more to be, you should know what is in there, and what it states is what it is. And therefore, to reach that, I clearly took this time as an advantage, as an opportunity, and therefore emphasized that the team should work to clean up the government statements and make sure that budgetary provisions are not made and you don't provide it from elsewhere and hide it or put it unnoticed. I don't attribute any dishonesty, or I don't attribute any malfeasance in their practices or in the ways in which earlier things had happened, but it is reflective of the transparency with which the government under the Prime Minister's leadership functions, and that should also be reflected in the budget statement, and therefore we did this.
The sector which has seen the maximum reforms, Madam Minister, is the banking sector. So just to bring our viewers up to speed, first you've indicated that there is going to be a concept of bad bank. How realistically do you think this will be implemented? Because this also requires a lot of procedural work.
Yes, and we have been working together with RBI on this. The banks among themselves are willing to run such a holding company. The government will, of course, be giving some portion of help from our sides. If the banks themselves sit together and devise a way, I think it is the way in which they'll get implemented also. And the Reserve Bank and the Government of India are together with them on this. As things stand, banks don't have the wherewithal to carry forward with selling and realizing from the NPA assets, the bad assets. Unless they have the expertise, unless they have a dedicated team of people who can do it other than doing their banking function, that's never going to be achieved. And we can't go on giving provisioning for those NPAs, and as the values keep deteriorating. If the values are falling and if the erosion in the value is continuously happening, banks are taking a bigger and bigger haircut. We thought the best way was to have this holding company idea. Through the Reserve Bank, make it possible for banks to cull out all the bad assets and put them there, from where a process-driven way of all the asset reconstruction companies, which are private companies, can come in and bid for those assets, take them, and from the realized value, the banks can get whatever they can get. Of course, there will be a haircut, but at least they'll be out of the bad asset. So we have looked at workable ways of establishing this not bad bank, but a asset reconstruction model. And I'm very hopeful that it will definitely do good for the banks.
Do you see this materializing in FY22?
I would like to have it done this year. I'll put all the efforts for it.
You also approved an idea of a development infra fund. These are things which have been tried in the past and the success was not very great. What are the guardrails which you will put around so that the entire process this time is smooth when it comes to infra financing?
No, the first thing is, even while we were working on this idea, the lessons learned from the failures of IDBI were definitely kept in our mind. And that has played a role in the way in which we are going to devise this. Equally, we are also making sure that the amendments that I'm going to bring in for establishing the DFI will have a place for private sector to also play their role. So statutorily, we will be providing for private sector DFIs, because I think in today's aspirational India, with the economy revving to grow, the demands for long-term financing for infrastructure cannot be met with just one institution. There have to be a lot of institutions, competing institutions, bettering their performance each time and being able to provide that fund competitive rate and understanding the long-term lending risks. And therefore, establishing a DFI is not a business on its own. One has been seeing DFIs earlier, as you rightly remind us. But this one will have to compete with the market. It has got to be run professionally. And that is why I said the amount that I give is what is going to be used to leverage greater resources from the market. I've pegged it at ambitious 5 lakh crores in the next several years. So hopefully it will succeed.
Some are questioning the disinvestment target because this year, because of COVID, the numbers were not reached. But given that there is LIC, there is Air India, there is BPCL, can I safely assume that's a number which is a well thought of number, and there is a very high probability that you will be able to achieve that number well within FY22?
We've just been realistic about it. I don't think it is either overestimated or underestimated or anything. We've just been realistic.
But the entire disinvestment process, since the indication from the government is that it is going to be a rolling process, are we looking at similar number in coming subsequent years also?
Well, we've announced the policy for the public sector enterprises. Other than in the core sectors where we have notified the core sectors, where we will keep the presence of public sector enterprises to the bare minimum, all others will have to be disinvested or amalgamated to become larger, survivable, sustainable, scalable institutions of size. So we will be having a very steady policy for the next few years. It can't happen all in 1 year. But if private sector investors otherwise from India and outside also know that these are here to come, the market also gets ready for that. Therefore, in a hurried manner, underestimating or overestimating any one particular enterprise will never happen. These are there, people will start showing interest, and gradually they can come up.
Under your leadership, Madam Minister, banks have consolidated. Now the number of big banks are less than 6. You've also mentioned that you are looking at selling majority stake in 2 banks. Will that be the shape of PSU banks where 5-6 relevant banks will be there?
No, I don't see an India without public sector banks. But to what scale, but what size? Are you going to have just a lot of these banks because they've been there for a long time, even if they are not doing business at all, or even if they are in no position to revive? Or are we going to help consolidate and have many more state banks in India? That's what is the need of the hour. We want large banks in the public sector who can undertake many of those typical bank functions which they should do, and we are in favor of that. But at the same time, just the sentiment that it is a public sector bank cannot leave banks which are just not rising in spite of all the support that they receive.
Madam Minister, some public undertakings like Coal India, BHEL, BEL, State Bank of India, these are jewels. But from a market standpoint, investors do not give them the true value. Are you looking at working closely towards changing the perception of some of the PSUs? Because more than business, more than talent, there is a perception problem there.
Of course, but there should be such professionals who will help the ministries to understand how to realize those values. It's not the finance ministry's function. It's got to be done by the respective ministries with professionals sitting and advising.
Madam Minister, Honorable Prime Minister came up with the punchline, or his idea, his vision was that made in India for the world. How excited are you about the PLI schemes, and what to your mind has been the initial response to the schemes which you've rolled out?
I think there's been immense interest in the PLI scheme. And PLI schemes are now being the favorites among several industries to suggest saying, provide us one such for our sector. It has invoked a lot of interest. It is showing meaningful results. It's not going to be, a subsidy to someone who can otherwise, produce. But for every additional export is where you're doing something to help them out. So that's been a very well received scheme, and I can see the results coming.
Madam Minister, just last 2 questions. The fact that direct tax rates have not gone out, can I safely assume that now the regime is a stable tax regime and taxes may not go higher and they are also unlikely to come down in a hurry?
I've not applied my mind about bringing rates down or increasing the rates, because I clearly took it off table for this budget. We'll have to see how we can handle the next. I'll certainly continue with a certain consistent policy rather than have a mercurial one which changes every year.
Final question, Madam Minister. How do you want this budget to be remembered?
As a budget which actually helped the economy to revive and also give a message to the world that India and its entrepreneurs do everything that they can show their strength. It's like the cricket team in Australia. Whoever thought that they will make a difference? They won. They won the test series. That drive to compete and the drive to succeed just needs that little hand-holding which we in the government are willing to do, and we shall do that. And that's what this budget should be remembered for.
Well, everyone has welcomed this budget. Markets have given a standing ovation, and from my experience, I can say as member of press, this is one of the finest budget I have tracked in my history. So thank you very much, and my sincere compliments for presenting a dream budget.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your kind words.